Emily stood at the stove, stirring pasta sauce as the aroma of garlic and basil filled the kitchen of their cozy home in suburban Chicago. She was 30 and proud of her career as a marketer at a local firm, though the work was sometimes draining. Her long brown hair was pulled back into a messy bun, and she was wearing an old gray sweater that she liked to wear around the house. Her husband, Jake, 32, an engineer at a construction company, had just gotten home from work. He dropped his briefcase by the door and, without saying a word, came up behind Emily, wrapping his arm around her waist. "You smell like an Italian restaurant," he said, nuzzling his nose into her neck. Emily smiled, not looking up from the saucepan. "Is this a compliment, or are you just hungry?" "Both," Jake replied, squeezing her waist lightly before playfully slapping her butt and walking over to the fridge to get a bottle of water. "Have you had a long day?" "No way." The client changed the campaign concept again the day before the deadline. She rolled her eyes, trying the sauce with a spoon. "And you?" "Just a normal construction site. Concrete, blueprints, a couple of idiots who don't read the directions." Jake leaned against the counter, looking at her with a small smile. "But you know, seeing you at the stove fixes everything." Emily turned to face him, her hands on her hips. "Is this a hint that I should cook more often?" "No, it's a hint that you look damn cute even when you're grumbling about clients." He winked and took a sip of water. She shook her head, but the smile didn't leave her face. Jake had always been like this, openly admiring her, even after 4 years of marriage. His physical affection, hugs, kisses, casual touches was part of their daily routine, and Emily loved it. It made her feel wanted, even in an old sweater and no makeup. Later, at dinner, they sat at a small wooden table in the living room. Jazz played softly in the background from the speakers Jake had bought at a garage sale last summer. Emily twirled spaghetti around her fork and talked about her coworker, Sarah, who was complaining about her boss again. She literally whined for half an hour about how he was making her redo her reports, and then she went to have coffee with him like nothing had happened, Emily said, biting into a piece of bread. Jake laughed, taking a sip of wine from his glass. "Typical Sarah. Has she ever done anything without complaining?" "I haven't noticed that," Emily said with a shrug. "But at least she's funny. Now that new guy in sales, Tim, he's something else. He tried to sell me an idea for a cat commercial today. Cats, Jake. For a company that sells industrial pumps. Maybe cats in helmets?" Jake suggested, grinning. "I'd buy one." "You'd buy anything if I offered it," she teased, poking him across the table with her fork. "Exactly," he agreed, catching her hand and quickly kissing her wrist before releasing it. "You're my weak spot." Emily felt a warmth in her chest. Moments like these, light, playful, full of small gestures, were what made their marriage special. She knew that not all couples maintained such a spark after years together, and it made her feel a little smug. The next day, Emily met her friends Lisa and Kate at a coffee shop on the corner of Lincoln Avenue. Lisa, 35, was a school psychologist and married to a boring accountant named Mark. Kate, 28, was a graphic designer and always looking for the one. They sat at a table by the window, sipping lattes and catching up on the latest gossip. "So he tells me I need to be more flexible with my schedule," Lisa complained, rolling her eyes. "Mark, who can't even take out the trash without being reminded, is teaching me to be flexible. Did you hear that?" "Oh, that's classic," Kate said, taking a bite of her croissant. "My ex was like that too, always telling me I should chill out and then forgetting to pay my bills." Emily listened, smiling, but her mind was on the night before. She remembered the way Jake had put his arm around her while she was washing the dishes after dinner, and how his hands had slid down her sides before he had kissed her neck. It had been so natural, so familiar, that she had hardly thought about it. "Hey, Emily, where are you?" Lisa waved her hand in front of her face. "We're suffering here, and you're daydreaming." "Sorry," Emily laughed, sipping her coffee. "I just remembered how Jake tried to help me with the dishes yesterday. He just ended up standing behind me and distracting me." Kate rolled her eyes, but with a smile. Oh my God, your perfect husband again. Don't start. Oh, come on, I'm not bragging, Emily said, though her tone suggested otherwise. It's just that he's always like that. Even after work, when I look like a bum, he still looks at me like I'm on the cover of a magazine. You're lucky, Lisa sighed. Mark barely notices when I'm in the room. I put on a new dress yesterday, and he asked if it was time to do the laundry. Seriously, Emily, how do you do it? How do you make him so attentive? Emily shrugged, though inside she felt proud. I don't know. He's just like that. Always has been. Sometimes even too much, you know. Yesterday I tried to watch a series, and he kept trying to hug me. I had to push him away to finish the episode. Poor thing, Kate said sarcastically. It must be hard for you with a husband who can't keep his hands off you. Well, sometimes it gets tiring, Emily said, but then added, but I like it, actually. It's like he's still head over heels in love. Yeah, Mark's only in love with his laptop, Lisa muttered, stirring sugar into her coffee. Maybe I should start cooking in my underwear, like in the movies. Maybe that'll work. Try it, Emily laughed. But I warn you, Jake wouldn't let me cook. He'd immediately drag me. Well, you know. Kate faked a groan. Enough, I'm about to get jealous. Where's my Jake, huh? Why do I only meet guys who say hi and disappear after 2 days? Because you're too cool for them, Emily said with a wink. You just have to wait for your engineer. The conversation moved on to other topics: Kate's job, Lisa's high school dramas, the new barista who Kate thought was cute. But Emily was still thinking about Jake. Her friends, though they were joking, were clearly jealous of her marriage, and it fueled her confidence. She knew she had something many people didn't. That evening, Emily and Jake decided to go to a local bar that had live music on Friday nights. The Old Town Bar was packed with students, couples, and a few rowdy groups celebrating the end of the work week. They found a table in the corner and ordered beer and fries. On stage, a local band was tuning guitars while the bartender, a balding guy named Tony, was yelling something about last chance for a discount. Remind me why we didn't go to the movies, Jake asked, taking a sip from the bottle. Because you said you wanted something alive, Emily replied, nudging him with her elbow. Now don't complain. I'm not complaining. It's just so noisy in here that I can barely hear you grumbling. He smirked, moving closer and placing his hand on her back. Emily rolled her eyes, but didn't pull away. His touch was habitual, almost automatic. She noticed a couple at the next table, a guy in a plaid shirt and a girl with bright red hair, arguing over something to do with their phone. The girl was pointing at the screen, and the guy looked like he wanted to disappear into the ground. Look, Emily whispered, nodding in their direction. It looks like someone got caught texting. Jake looked and chuckled. Poor guy. I hope he at least deleted his browser history. You couldn't do that, Emily teased. You're too busy watching me. Guilty, he said, leaning down and quickly kissing her temple. But you know I can't do otherwise. She smiled, but then the band started playing, a loud rock cover of an old Nirvana song. Conversation was impossible, and they just sat there, listening to the music. Jake kept his hand on her knee, tapping his fingers lightly to the rhythm. Emily watched the crowd, some dancing, some arguing with the bartender about the bill, and an older woman in the corner, clearly not from around here, leafing through a menu as if she were on another planet. Look, that lady looks lost, Emily said as the music faded briefly. Maybe she thought this was a library. Or looking for his 70s rocker, Jake added. I'm going to get a beer, want another? Yes, but only light. Otherwise, I already feel like French fries. She patted her stomach. Jake laughed and headed to the counter, where Tony was already arguing with a guy in a baseball cap about how many shots he'd ordered. Emily stayed at the table, looking at Jake. He was tall, with dark hair and a light stubble, and even in a plain t-shirt, he looked attractive. She noticed one of the waitresses, a young blonde, smiled at him a little too long while she took his order. Emily didn't care. She was used to Jake getting attention, but he always came back to her. When he returned with 2 bottles of beer, she said, "That waitress clearly thinks you're cute." Who? Jake looked around, genuinely confused. "I didn't even notice." "And I'm not going to apologize," he said, clinking the bottle with her. "For us." "To us," she repeated, and they drank. The rest of the evening passed easily. They chatted about work, about how their neighbor, Mr. Clark, had complained again about his lawn mower being too loud, and about their plans for the weekend. Jake reached out a couple of times to tug at her hair or just touch her arm. Each time it was subtle, but Emily felt his warmth, his presence. She knew he loved her not just with his words, but with every gesture, every look. When they got home, it was after midnight, and Emily was brushing her teeth in the bathroom and Jake was taking off his shoes in the bedroom. She heard him shout, "Hey, you left your sneakers in the middle of the hallway. I almost killed myself." "I'm sorry," she shouted back, spitting out the paste. "You'll get over it." "You keep saying that until I break my leg," he said, appearing in the bathroom doorway. He leaned against the frame, looking at her. "You know, you look cute even with toothpaste on your chin." Emily wiped her face with a towel and threw a toothbrush at him. "Go to bed, romantic." He caught the brush and laughed. "Only if you're with me." She shook her head, but followed him into the bedroom. As they settled in, Jake moved closer, wrapping his arms around her from behind. His hand rested on her stomach, and he murmured, "Good night, my chef." "Good night, my engineer," she replied, closing her eyes. As Emily lay in the dark, she thought that her life might not be perfect, but with Jake, she felt like she belonged. His love, his constant attention, made her confident, stronger. She couldn't imagine how she could get tired of that, of her husband still looking at her like she was a miracle. Emily sat at her desk in the office, staring at her laptop screen. A document about a new advertising campaign for a client that made industrial pumps was open on the monitor, but her eyes had been skimming the same lines for the past hour. The clock on the wall read 6:47 p.m., and she was still in the office, although most of her coworkers had long since left. The new project was demanding overtime. The client, a large company in Milwaukee, was sending new edits every 2 days, and the deadline was tightening like a vice. Emily rubbed her temples, trying to concentrate, but her mind kept returning to the call from the hospital that morning. Her father, Tom, 60, was in the hospital with a heart attack. Doctors said he was stable but needed tests and possibly surgery. Emily spent the morning calling her mother, who was on the verge of panic, and her older brother, David, who lived in Denver and had promised to fly out for the weekend. She felt overwhelmed. Work, the hospital, the endless calls, all at once. "Emily, are you still there?" came the voice of Sarah, her colleague, who peered into the office, holding a bag and coat. Sarah, a 30-year-old blonde with a sharp tongue, was a sales manager and was famous for her ability to get discounts from suppliers. "Yeah, trying not to drown in edits," Emily replied, not looking up from her screen. "The client wants a more dynamic tagline again." "What does that even mean?" "That means they don't know what they want," Sarah chuckled, leaning against the doorframe. "Listen, let's go to the bar across the street. Have a cocktail, relax. Tim from sales promised to treat us." Emily shook her head. "I can't. I need to finish this presentation, and then I need to go to the hospital to see my father." "Oh, right, you said so. How is he?" Sarah frowned, her voice softening. "Stable, but it's unclear yet. They're waiting for the test results." Emily sighed, leaning back in her chair. "Mom calls every 2 hours, and I don't even know what to tell her." "Take a vacation, seriously," Sarah said. "You look like you haven't slept in a week." "I can't. If I leave now, this project will fail and the boss will kill me." Emily rubbed her eyes. "Okay, go have fun for me." Sarah shrugged. "Well, if you change your mind, we're at the Rusty Anchor. Tim promised to tell you about the time he got stuck in an elevator with a client. Sounds like a comedy." "You'll have fun," Emily chuckled. Tell him I said hi." Sarah left and Emily went back to work, but after half an hour she gave up. Her head was buzzing and the letters on the screen were blurring. She packed her things and drove to the hospital, where her father was lying in a room on the third floor. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and coffee from a vending machine. Emily found room 312 and knocked. Her mother, Linda, was sitting by her father's bed, leafing through a magazine. Tom lay hooked up to monitors, but he looked better than Emily had expected, his cheeks pink and his eyes alert. "Hi, Dad," she said, leaning down to kiss his forehead. "How are you?" "Fine," Tom muttered, adjusting the oxygen tube under his nose. "All these doctors do is prick me with needles, and the food here is like cardboard." "Don't grumble," Linda said, putting the magazine down. "You're lucky to be alive at all." "Come on, Lynn, one attack isn't the end of the world." Tom waved it off, but his voice was weak. Emily sat down on the chair next to her. "What do the doctors say?" "More tests tomorrow," Linda replied. "If everything is okay, maybe he'll be discharged in a couple of days. But he needs rest, and of course he's already planning to fix the lawnmower." "I'm fine," Tom grumbled. "Emily, tell me what's wrong with you. How's Jake?" "Jake's fine," she said, forcing a smile. "He tried to steal my toast this morning, but I won." "He's a good guy," Tom said. "Stick to him. Not every man runs after his wife the way he does you." Emily nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. She remembered how Jake had put his arm around her from behind and started kissing her neck while she was getting ready for work that morning. She had laughed and brushed it off, but now, sitting in the hospital room, she thought his touch had been too insistent. She had just wanted to drink some coffee and collect her thoughts, but here he was, pressed against her, clearly aroused. It wasn't the first time, and while she had liked it before, today she felt a little irritated. "Emily, are you okay?" Linda asked, noticing her thoughtful look. "You look so pale." "I'm just tired," she replied, waving it off. "Work, you know." "Don't overexert yourself," Linda said, "and tell Jake to feed you. You're as thin as a reed." "Mom, I'm eating," Emily rolled her eyes. "Don't start." They talked for another half hour until the nurse, a young woman named Clara, came in to check Tom's vitals. Clara was short, with short black hair and a tired smile. "Mr. Wilson, how are you feeling?" she asked, looking at the monitor. "Better than this hospital food," Tom replied. "When will you let me go?" "That's up to the doctor," Clara said, writing something down on her tablet. "But you look cheerful. Maybe you'll be going home soon." "Did you hear that, Lynn? Cheerful." Tom winked at his wife. Emily smiled, but her mind was busy. She said goodbye to her parents and drove home, feeling the fatigue weighing on her shoulders. When she walked into the house, Jake was sitting on the couch in the living room, scrolling through his phone. He was wearing an old t-shirt and jeans, and there was an empty bottle of beer on the coffee table. "Hello," he said, looking up. "How's Dad?" "Better," Emily said, dropping her bag on the floor and falling down next to him. "More tests tomorrow, but he's already grumbling, so he's probably getting better." "That's good," Jake said, moving closer and putting his hand on her shoulder. "What about you?" "I'm exhausted," she admitted, throwing her head back on the sofa. "Work is a nightmare. The hospital is stressful. I just want to switch off." "I can help," he said, leaning down and kissing her cheek. His hand slid to her waist, and he pulled her closer. Emily tensed. She wanted to just sit, complain, maybe watch some stupid TV show. But Jake, as usual, was too close too. Active. She felt his breathing get heavier, and she knew he was aroused again, even though she hadn't even kissed him back. "Jake," she said, moving away, "I'm really tired. Can I just sit?" "Sure," he said, but there was a hint of disappointment in his voice. He pulled his hand away and leaned back on the couch. "Want to order pizza?" "Yeah, that sounds great," she said, trying to smooth over the awkwardness. "Pepperoni, like usual?" "Yeah," he nodded, picking up his phone to place an order. While Jake called the pizza place, Emily stared at the ceiling. She felt uneasy. She loved Jake, she loved his attention, but in the last few days, his constant touching, which always led to one thing, was starting to bother her. She just needed peace, not this constant feeling that every hug had to end in something more. Later, when the pizza arrived, they ate it straight from the box on the couch. The delivery guy, a guy in his 20s with an eyebrow piercing, chatted nonstop while Jake searched for cash. "Seriously, man, there was such a traffic jam today. I thought your pizza would get cold," he said, handing over the box. "Good thing you're not far away." "Yeah, lucky," Jake said, handing him the tip. "Thanks for the quickness." "No problem." The guy waved and left. Emily took a bite of pizza as she listened to Jake talk about his day. He talked about the new intern at work who almost dropped a beam on the construction site and how their boss was yelling at everyone about late deliveries. She nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. She remembered Lisa calling that afternoon during lunch and asking to meet up for the weekend. "Lisa wants to go to that new place in Madison on Saturday," Emily said, interrupting Jake. "She says it has the best tacos in town." "Cool," Jake said, taking a sip of his cola. "Should we go? Or is this just a bachelorette party?" "I don't know yet," she answered. "She's still inviting Kate, but I guess we can go with you. Lisa will still whine about Mark, so you'll dilute her mood." "I'm a hero," Jake grinned, moving closer and trying to put his hand on her thigh. Emily instinctively pulled away, pretending to reach for a napkin. "The pizza is greasy," she muttered, wiping her hands. "I don't want to get the couch dirty." Jake didn't say anything, but she saw him frown slightly. He finished his bite and turned on the TV, choosing an old sitcom. They watched in silence, and Emily felt guilty but also annoyed. Why couldn't he just sit there without making it all about this? She needed rest, not another moment of having to respond to his desires. When they went to bed, Jake turned to her and said, "If you need something, just say so, okay? I can see you're on edge." "I'm fine," she replied, pulling the blanket up. "It's just been a rough day." "Okay," he said, kissing her forehead. "Good night." "Good night," she muttered, closing her eyes. Lying in the dark, Emily felt tiredness mingle with irritation. She loved Jake, but his constant desire to be closer, physically closer, was beginning to wear her down. She wanted simple comforts, talk, laughter, silence. But instead, she increasingly felt a pressure she hadn't noticed before. Emily stormed into the office elevator, clutching her purse so tightly that her knuckles were white. Her cheeks were flushed with anger, and her mind was racing with the conversation she had with her boss, Mr. Reynolds, who had just berated her in front of the entire department. A new project for a client in Milwaukee that she had been working on for weeks had turned out to be not up to par. Reynolds, a balding 50-year-old in a cheap suit, was pointing at her presentation, declaring that it didn't reflect the spirit of the company. Emily tried to defend herself, but he cut her off, telling her to redo it by the morning. It was now 7:12 p.m., and she was late to meet her mother at the hospital, where her father was still recovering from a heart attack. In the elevator, she pushed the button for the first floor and looked at her reflection in the mirrored wall. There were shadows under her eyes, her hair was out of its ponytail, and her blouse was wrinkled. She looked as bad as she felt. Next to her stood the guy from it, a lanky, bespectacled guy named Nate, typing something into his phone. "Long day?" he asked, not looking up from the screen. "It couldn't be worse," Emily muttered. "Does your boss yell at you if you're 5 seconds late?" Nate chuckled. "My boss doesn't even notice if I'm alive or dead until the server crashes. But yeah, Reynolds is a real bloke. I heard him trash Sarah last week about the font in her report." "Lucky her," Emily said as the elevator doors opened. "Okay, good luck with the servers." "And you and Reynolds," Nate replied, waving goodbye. Emily ran out into the parking lot where an old Honda Civic was waiting. The drive to the hospital took half an hour because of traffic, and the whole time she kept thinking about Reynolds' words. "If you can't do this, Emily, we'll find someone who can." She gripped the steering wheel, muttering under her breath, "Idiot. I'd try to copy 40 slides overnight." At the hospital, she found her mother, Linda, in a third-floor waiting room. Linda was sitting on a plastic chair, clutching an empty coffee cup. Her face was tense, but she smiled when she saw her daughter. "You're late," Linda said, standing up. "I thought you were stuck at work." "That's right," Emily replied, hugging her. "How's Daddy?" "He's sleeping. The doctor came by and said the tests are better, but surgery is probably needed." Linda sighed. "I just want him home already." "Me too," Emily said, sitting down on the chair next to her. "How are you holding up?" "Barely," Linda admitted. "It's good that David is flying in tomorrow. At least he'll make my father listen to the doctors." Emily nodded, but her mind was busy. She wanted to support her mother, but exhaustion and anger at Reynolds crowded out everything else. At that moment, Clara, the nurse Emily had seen last week, walked past. Clara was carrying a stack of files and looked just as exhausted. "Mrs. Wilson, is everything all right?" Clara asked, stopping. Mr. Wilson was in a good mood today. He even joked about hospital soup. "He can do that," Linda smiled. "Thank you, Clara." "If anything, I'm on duty until midnight," Clara said and left, throwing Emily a sympathetic look. Emily stayed in the hospital for another hour, listening to Linda talk about the neighbor who had flooded their mailbox with flyers about selling their house. But her mind was elsewhere, on work, on her father, on everything falling apart around her. It was dark when she finally said goodbye and drove home. At home, in their small house in suburban Chicago, the only light was on in the living room. Emily walked in, dropping her bag by the door. Jake was standing at the stove, stirring something in a pan. He was wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt, and vegetables were sizzling on the stove. The smell of peppers and onions filled the kitchen. "Hello," he said, turning around. "I thought you might want something to eat. How's Dad?" "Stable," Emily said, collapsing into a chair at the kitchen table. "But it looks like we need surgery. Mom's freaking out, and I just don't know." "Hey, he'll be fine," Jake said, turning off the stove. "Your dad's as tough as an old oak tree. Want some wine?" "Better whiskey," she muttered, rubbing her neck. Today was hell. Jake took a bottle out of the cabinet and poured some into her glass. "Tell me, what happened?" Emily took a sip, wincing at the burning sensation. "Reynolds. That idiot trashed my presentation in front of everyone. Said it was not up to par and told me to redo it by morning. And I hadn't slept for 3 nights because of this project." "Seriously?" Jake frowned, sitting down across from him. "Does he think you're a robot? Should I talk to him?" "No, that'll only make things worse," she said, waving her hand. "He's already got a grudge against me. And now the hospital, Mom, everything at once. I'm on edge." Jake looked at her, his face softening. "You're taking on too much. Let me help. Maybe with dinner or something." "Thanks, but I just want to turn off my brain," she said, finishing her whiskey. "Can't I just sit and do nothing?" "Of course," he said, standing up. "Let's go to the sofa. I know what you need." Emily stood up, her legs aching with fatigue. They moved into the living room, where the remote and a couple of empty coffee mugs sat on the coffee table. Jake sat down on the couch and patted the space next to him. "Sit down," he said. "Let me stretch your shoulders. You're all stiff." Emily hesitated, but sat down. She really wanted to relax, and the massage sounded good. Jake placed his hands on her shoulders and began to knead them slowly, his fingers finding the knots of tension. She closed her eyes, feeling the pain in her muscles recede. "Oh my God, you're a wizard," she muttered, hanging her head. "Where did you learn to do that?" "On YouTube," he chuckled. "Well, I practiced on you. You're always so uptight after work." "Because work is hell," she said, sighing. "If Reynolds says not up to par one more time, I'm going to throw a stapler at him." "I'd watch," Jake laughed, continuing to massage. "But you know you're tough. You can handle it." Emily smiled, but her eyes were still closed. The massage was exactly what she needed, simple, soothing. But after a few minutes, Jake leaned down and began kissing her neck, his lips soft against her skin. His hands slowed, sliding lower, to her collarbones. She felt him move closer, and suddenly she knew he was aroused. His breathing was heavier, his body tensing. The irritation flared instantly. Emily opened her eyes and pulled away, turning to face him. "Jake, seriously? I told you I was tired." "What?" He looked puzzled, removing his hands. "I just—" "You're always like this," she interrupted, getting up from the couch. Her voice trembled with anger. "I just want to relax, and you turn everything into sex. It's disgusting." Jake froze, his face pale. He looked at her as if she had hit him. "Emily, I didn't. I just wanted to support you. I can't control how my body reacts when I'm around you." "Then try," she cried, crossing her arms. "I'm exhausted, Jake. Work, the hospital, everything is falling apart, and you can't just sit here and not think about it?" "It's not just me," he said, his voice quieter but still hurt. "I love you. It's okay for me to react this way. I'm not pressuring you." "Okay," she snapped. "It's not okay when I can't even get a massage without you." She trailed off, at a loss for words. "Just forget it. I'm going to bed." "Emily, wait," he began, standing up, but she had already headed for the stairs. "Good night, Jake," she said without turning around. In the bedroom, she slammed the door and fell onto the bed without undressing. The anger was still simmering, but underneath it was a tiredness, heavy and oppressive. She knew she had overdone it when she called his reaction disgusting, but at that moment it seemed true. She needed peace, not another moment of having to conform to his wishes. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but guilt was already beginning to break through her irritation. Downstairs in the living room, Jake sat on the couch, staring at Emily's empty glass. He didn't know what to say or do. Her words, disgusting, echoed in his head, and he felt as if his love, his desire for closeness, was suddenly wrong. Emily woke to the sound of her alarm clock beeping on the nightstand. It was 6:30 a.m., and gray light filtered through the blinds of their suburban Chicago bedroom. She reached over to turn off her phone and noticed that Jake was already up, his side of the bed empty, his sheets neatly tucked in. Usually he'd wake her with a kiss or at least a grumble about her setting the alarm too loud again. Today, the silence was deafening. She walked down to the kitchen where Jake stood at the coffee maker, pouring himself a mug. He was wearing a work shirt and jeans, and his hair was still damp from his shower. The smell of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the toast he'd just pulled out of the toaster. "Good morning," Emily said, opening the refrigerator to get some yogurt. "Morning," Jake answered without turning around. His voice was flat, without its usual warmth. "Want some coffee?" "Yay, thanks," she said, sitting down at the table. "You're early today." "Yes, I have to be at the construction site by 7, he replied, putting a mug in front of her and walking over to the sink. "There's a new contractor there. We need to check that they don't screw up." Emily nodded, stirring her yogurt with a spoon. She waited for him to come over, maybe put his arm around her shoulders, or at least smile like he usually did in the morning. But Jake was just washing his mug, his back turned. He had been different since their fight 3 days ago, when she had yelled that his arousal from her closeness was disgusting. No touching, no kissing, not even the occasional gesture. He kept his distance, and it was strange. Emily had initially sighed in relief. Finally, she could simply exist without constant physical attention. But now, looking at his back, she felt a slight twinge of anxiety. "Are you okay?" she asked, sipping her coffee. "Yes, everything is fine," he said, wiping his hands with a towel. "Are you going to the hospital today?" "After work," she replied. "Dad's having more tests tomorrow, so I'll stop by Mom's and support her." "Okay," he nodded, taking the keys from the table. "Have a nice day." "You too," she said, but he was already heading for the door. No goodbye kiss, no, don't miss me. Just the slam of the door and the sound of his pickup truck pulling out of the yard. Emily remained at the table, staring into her mug. She should have felt better. She wanted him to stop making every moment into something more. But this coldness, this formality, she wasn't prepared for how it would feel. At the office, Emily was deep in work. She had reworked her presentation after Reynolds's humiliating dressing down, and now the client was demanding more changes, something about a more modern approach. She was sitting in her office, going over notes, when Sarah, a sales colleague, knocked on the door, smiling and clutching a latte. "Hey, are you alive?" Sarah asked, plopping down on the chair opposite. "You look like you slept in the printer." "Thanks for the compliment," Emily muttered, not looking up from the screen. "Reynolds wants a fresh look again. I don't know what he means by that anymore." "He doesn't know himself," Sarah chuckled, sipping her coffee. "Listen, let's go to lunch at the diner across the street. There's a new chef there. He makes burgers the size of my head." "I can't," Emily said, rubbing her eyes. "I have to finish this nonsense before 3, and then I have to go to the hospital." "To your father again?" Sarah frowned. "How is he?" "Better, but still in the hospital," Emily replied. "Mom says he's already arguing with the doctors, so he's probably getting better." "That's good," Sarah said. "And you hold on. If Reynolds does that again, tell him I'm going to steal his favorite pen." Emily smiled weakly. "Agreed. And what are you doing? Flirting with Tim from sales again?" "Oh, don't start," Sarah laughed, rolling her eyes. "He tried to tell me a joke about accountants yesterday. It was so bad, I almost died." "Poor Tim," Emily said. "Maybe he should try cats in commercials." They chatted for a few more minutes until Sarah left to meet with a client. Emily went back to work, but her thoughts kept returning to Jake. The conversation from that morning, if it could even be called a conversation, was constantly on her mind. She'd grown accustomed to his gentle teasing, the way he reached out to her even when she grumbled. Now he was polite but distant, like a roommate rather than a husband. On her lunch break, she went into the office's ground floor cafeteria, which smelled of soup and burnt sandwiches. Rita, an older woman with bright red lipstick who always knew what everyone was ordering, was behind the register. Emily grabbed a salad and a bottle of water when Rita peered at her over her glasses. "Emily, are you on a diet again?" she asked, punching in the check. "Have a pastry. You're as thin as my cat." "No, Rita, I'm just not hungry," Emily replied, smiling. "Is your cat still stealing socks?" "Every day," Rita sighed. "Yesterday he found my scarf. My husband now calls him Bandit." "And how is your husband? The cute one who came to pick you up last week?" "Jake's fine," Emily said, but her voice shook. "Just busy with work." "Guys," Rita chuckled, handing her the change. "My Bob is always busy too, until I make him fix the sink. Don't let yours get bored, get it?" "Got it," Emily nodded, walking away to the table. She ate her salad, looking out the window at people with umbrellas walking along the sidewalk. A light rain was starting. Talking to Rita had reminded her of Jake, not the old man, but the man he had become. She remembered him coming home last night, saying hello, and then going straight to the garage, supposedly to check his tools. They had eaten dinner in silence, and when she suggested watching a movie, he said he was tired and went to bed. No hugs, no usual teasing. She wanted that peace, but now it felt wrong. After work, Emily went to the hospital. Her father, Tom, was in the room, leafing through a newspaper, while her mother, Linda, was knitting something blue. In the corner of the room sat Tom's neighbor, an elderly man named Frank, watching television with the sound off. "At last," said Tom, putting down the paper. "I thought you'd forgotten about your old man." "Don't start, Dad," Emily said, kissing him on the cheek. "Are you okay?" "Better than this soup," he muttered, nodding at the tray with the empty bowl. "Seriously, who makes this crap?" "Tom, come on," Linda said, without looking up from her knitting. "Emily, how's work?" "As usual," she replied, sitting down. "The boss is yelling, the clients are changing everything at the last minute. And what about you?" "Your dad thinks he's a doctor," Linda said, rolling her eyes. He argued with the nurse today that he didn't need another Roman 4. Because I'm fine, Tom protested. And this Clara, though sweet, is as stubborn as my old tractor. Emily smiled, but her mind was busy. She wanted to talk about Jake, about how he had suddenly become so distant, but she decided against it. She didn't want to worry her parents. Instead, she listened to Frank complain about a TV show he was watching, something about fixing cars. These guys think they can fix a carburetor in half an hour, Frank grumbled, pointing at the screen. In my day, it took a day, and that was if you were lucky. Did you hear that, Emily? Tom winked. Frank's our carburetor expert. I'm just telling the truth, Frank muttered, but his eyes were laughing. Emily stayed at the hospital for an hour until the doctor, a tired-looking young man, came to check on Tom. She said goodbye and drove home, feeling the fatigue weighing on her shoulders. The rain had gotten heavier, and the wipers on her Honda squealed as they fought the water. At home, Jake was in the living room, watching the news on the couch. There was a plate with the remains of a sandwich on the coffee table. He looked up when she entered, but he didn't smile. "Hello," he said. "How's Dad?" "Fine," she replied, taking off her coat. "He's arguing with the nurses, so he's probably getting better." "That's good," he said, returning to the television. Emily paused in the doorway, waiting for him to ask something else, or at least offer to eat together. But he didn't, and she felt the emptiness growing inside her. She went into the kitchen, poured herself some water, and returned to the living room, sitting on the other end of the sofa. "Want to watch something?" she asked, picking up the remote. "A comedy, maybe?" "I don't mind," he said, shrugging. "Choose." She turned on an old sitcom they both loved, but the laughter from the TV only served to accentuate the silence between them. Before, Jake would have moved closer, put his hand on her knee, or commented on the jokes. Now he sat up straight, staring at the screen as if they were just acquaintances. Emily tried to focus on the show, but her gaze kept drifting back to Jake. His face was calm but distant, as if he were somewhere else. She remembered how, a week ago, he would have hugged her, maybe teased her about choosing a stupid show again. Now he didn't even look at her. "Are you sure you're okay?" she asked when the commercial interrupted the show. "Yes," he said without turning around. "I'm just tired. It's been a long day." "I see," she muttered, feeling her voice sound strained. "If anything happens, I'm here." "Thank you," he said, and that was all. She stood up to get a blanket from the closet and noticed their neighbor, Mr. Clark, walking his Labrador in the rain. Clark, wearing a bright yellow raincoat, was grumbling at the dog as it dragged its leash toward a puddle. Emily almost smiled, but the emptiness returned when she sat back down. The rest of the evening passed in the same way. They watched TV, exchanging rare phrases about the weather and work. When it was time for bed, Jake got up first, saying, "I'm going to bed. Good night." "Good night," she replied, watching him go upstairs. She stayed on the couch, feeling the relief of not being touched by him give way to something new. She missed his warmth, his silly jokes, the way he looked at her like she was the center of his world. She wanted that peace, but now that he was here, it felt wrong, like part of their connection was gone. Emily turned off the TV and went to bed, hoping that in the morning everything would be different, but deep down, knowing that something had changed forever. Emily sat in her office, scrolling through a spreadsheet of campaign data. The laptop screen glowed, reflecting her tired face. It had been a week since their argument, when she had called Jake's agitation disgusting, and since then their home had become a museum of silence. Jake no longer hugged her, kissed her, or joked like he used to. His demeanor was polite but cold, like that of a colleague, not a husband. At first, Emily had welcomed this calm, but now, 7 days later, she felt something was missing. She missed his glances, his light touches that had once seemed intrusive. The clock on the wall read 11:45 and the office was buzzing. Phones were ringing, printers were whirring, and behind the glass partition someone was arguing about delivery dates. Emily tried to concentrate, but her thoughts kept returning to Jake. He had left for work that morning, saying only, "See you tonight." No smile, no wink. She wanted to talk, maybe apologize, but she kept stopping. Why should she apologize? He was the one overreacting, turning her words into a disaster. There was a knock at the door and Sarah, her sales colleague, poked her head in. Sarah was wearing a bright blue blouse and was carrying a plastic container of salad. "Hey, are you coming to lunch?" Sarah asked, placing the container on Emily's table. "The cafeteria has your favorite chicken soup today." "Maybe later," Emily replied, not looking up from the screen. "I need to finish this report for Reynolds. He's already asked me 3 times where the draft is." "Reynolds can wait," Sarah chuckled, sitting on the edge of the table. "Listen, you seem gloomy. Is it because of your father?" "Not only that," Emily said, leaning back in her chair. "Dad's getting better, but, well, it's complicated." "Jake?" Sarah narrowed her eyes. "Did you have a fight? You haven't talked about him in ages." Emily hesitated. She didn't want to dump everything on Sarah, but the silence was oppressive. "Well, something like that. I said something stupid, and now he acts like I'm his boss and not his wife." "Wow," Sarah raised her eyebrows. "What did you say? Call his favorite football crap?" "No," Emily smiled weakly. "It's just, he was too close, and I was on edge. I said I didn't like it, and now he won't touch me at all." "Wait," Sarah frowned. "You mean he's always hugging you? God, Emily, half the women in this office want a husband like that, and you turned him down?" "I didn't blow him off," Emily snapped. "I just wanted him to give me space. Now he's like a robot. He won't even look at me." Sarah shook her head. "Guys, they're either too much or nothing at all. Talk to him. Tell each other what's wrong and everything will be fine." "Easy to say," Emily muttered. "He doesn't even try to talk. Just good morning and good night." "Then start," Sarah said, standing up. "Okay, I'm going to get some soup. If you change your mind, come over. And don't sit here like a zombie." Sarah left, and Emily was alone. She knew Sarah was right, but the thought of talking to Jake made her nervous. What if he said he was tired of her, or that her words had hurt him more than she thought? She shook the thought away and turned back to the spreadsheet, but the numbers weren't adding up. At lunchtime, she went down to the cafeteria, which smelled of fried chicken and fresh bread. Rita, the cashier with the bright lipstick, was behind the counter, as always, chatting with a janitor named Carlos. Carlos, a short guy with a tattoo on his neck, was complaining about a broken vacuum cleaner. "I'm serious, Rita. This thing screams like my uncle at a wedding," Carlos said, wiping his hands with a rag. "And the boss says they won't buy a new one." "Tell him I'll yell too if he doesn't mop my floors," Rita chuckled, punching in Emily's check. "Oh, Emily, no salad today? Soup and a sandwich?" "Yeah," Emily nodded, placing the tray on the counter. "How are you, Rita?" "It's fine until Carlos starts whining," Rita replied with a wink. "Why are you so gloomy? Is Reynolds bothering you again?" "It's not just him," Emily said, taking the tray. "It's just a lousy day." "Take the cookies," Rita said, handing her a bag of chocolate cookies. "Free, it'll cheer you up." "Thank you," Emily smiled, walking away to the table. She ate her soup, looking at her coworkers at the next tables. 2 guys from it, Nate and another she didn't know, were arguing about a new Windows update. The woman from accounting, Marge, was scrolling on her tablet, mumbling about taxes. Emily felt disconnected from the noise. Her thoughts were at home with Jake. He'd come home from work yesterday, eaten dinner, and gone to the garage to fix his bike. When she'd invited him over to watch a show, he'd said he wanted to go to bed early. She'd laid down next to him, but he'd turned his back, and the silence between them had been worse than any argument. After work, Emily went to the hospital. Her father, Tom, was in the room, watching basketball on a small TV. Linda, her mother, sat nearby, reading a book. Tom's roommate, Frank, was asleep, snoring in the corner. "Hi, Dad," Emily said as she walked in. "How are you?" Better than those idiots, Tom muttered, nodding at the screen. Missed 3 shots in a row. How about you? Fine, she replied, sitting down. Work, you know. What do the doctors say? He'll be discharged tomorrow if the tests are good, Linda said, putting the book aside. But he can't lift anything heavy, and he's already planning to paint the barn. I'm fine, Lynn, Tom said. Emily, tell your mother I'm not disabled. Don't start, Dad, Emily said, smiling. Listen to the doctors, or I'll tie you to the bed myself. Ha, try it, Tom chuckled. Where's Jake? He hasn't been here for a long time. At work, Emily replied, feeling her smile tighten. He's busy too. Good guy, Tom said. Don't forget to tell him you need him. Men like to hear that. Emily nodded, but her stomach clenched. She hadn't said anything like that to Jake in a long time. She didn't know what to say to him at all. They talked for another half hour until Nurse Clara came in to check Tom's Roman 4. Clara was as friendly as ever, but tired. Mr. Wilson, you're a champion today, she said, looking at the monitor. Your pulse is like an athlete's. That's because I'm watching basketball, Tom replied. Emily, tell her I'm ready to run a marathon. Don't believe him, Emily laughed. He doesn't even want to mow the lawn. Clara smiled and left, and Emily soon said goodbye to her parents. The drive home was quiet, only the radio muttering about the traffic jams on the highway. She thought about Jake, about the way he looked at her in the morning, without the sparkle that was always in his eyes. She missed it, but her anger at his coldness overcame her desire to apologize. When she walked into the house, Jake was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for a salad. There was water boiling on the stove and a box of spaghetti on the table. The smell of onions and olive oil filled the air. Hi, Emily said, hanging up her coat. Are you cooking? Yeah, he replied without turning around. I decided to make some pasta. Do you want some? Of course, she said, sitting down at the table. How is your day? It's fine, he said, throwing the onion into the pan. It's a mess at the construction site, but nothing new. What about you? Work, hospital, she answered, looking at his back. It looks like Dad will be discharged tomorrow. That's cool, he said, stirring the onions. Tell him I said hi. Emily waited for him to ask something else, maybe turn around, smile. But he continued to cook, as if she were just a neighbor. She felt her irritation growing. He couldn't act like this forever, could he? She wanted his attention, his warmth, but instead she got this wall. Jake, she said, trying to keep her voice even. Are you even going to talk to me? He turned around, wiping his hands on a towel. I'm talking. What's wrong? You act like I'm a stranger, she said, crossing her arms. Not a word, not a look. Is it because of what I said? Are you seriously so pouty? Jake looked at her. His face was calm, but his eyes showed pain. You called my reactions disgusting, Emily. Said you didn't like it. I'm trying not to upset you. I was so wound up, she cried, standing up. Work, the hospital, everything. I didn't mean that you were like this. But now you're like a robot. Can't you just be normal? Normal? He asked, his voice growing a little louder. You said you felt disgusted when I touched you. I don't want you to feel that way again. That's why I stay away. That's not what I wanted, she cried, tears burning her eyes. I just wanted you to give me space sometimes, not this. You've stopped being yourself altogether. I don't know how to be myself if it irritates you, he said, looking down. I can't turn off how much I want you, but I can choose not to show it, and I do. Emily paused, her hands shaking. She wanted to say that she missed him, that she missed his warmth, but the words stuck. Instead, she blurted out, You're just overreacting. It was one phrase, and you're acting like I betrayed you. Jake sighed, returning to the frying pan. Maybe I'm overdoing it, but I don't want you to look at me like I'm something. Wrong again. I didn't look at him like that, she said, but her voice was weak. She knew it wasn't true. She'd seen his pain that night, but instead of apologizing, she'd remained defensive. "Let's eat," he said, turning off the stove. "The pasta is ready." Emily nodded, though her appetite had vanished. They sat down at the table and ate in silence, broken only by the clink of forks. She looked at Jake, at his concentrated face, and felt guilty, but still angry. He shouldn't have reacted like that, she thought. But deep down she knew that her words had hurt him more than she wanted to admit. After dinner, she went to wash the dishes and Jake said he was going to check the mail. When he returned, he threw several envelopes on the table and said, "I'm going to bed. See you in the morning." "Okay," she replied without turning away from the sink. She stood there, looking at the soapy water, feeling the emptiness filling her. She missed Jake, not the one who had just gone upstairs in silence, but the one who had looked at her with adoration, who couldn't pass her without touching her. But instead of following him, she continued washing the dishes, drowning her guilt in anger at his coldness. Emily stood in front of the bedroom mirror, smoothing out the wrinkles in her favorite dress, a tight, dark green one that Jake always complimented on. It was Friday, and she had decided to throw an evening for the two of them, hoping to recapture some of the intimacy that had disappeared 3 months ago. The argument in which she had called his physical attraction disgusting had left a deep mark. Jake had become distant. No hugs, no kisses, not even casual touches. Their conversations were limited to small matters, and their evenings on the couch were spent in silence. Emily had thought it was temporary at first, but now, 3 months later, she felt the gap between them growing. She put on some light makeup, let her hair down, and walked down to the living room. Jake was sitting at the kitchen table, flipping through some work plans on his tablet. He was wearing a gray t-shirt and jeans, and there was a bottle of water on the table. The smell of Emily's fried chicken filled the house. "Hello," she said, trying to keep her voice light. "Dinner's almost ready. Would you like some wine?" Jake looked up, but his gaze was neutral, like a man looking at a colleague. "Sounds good," he said, returning to his tablet. "White or red?" "Red," she said, taking a bottle out of the cabinet. "Remember when we drank this last year on Lake Michigan? You spilled half of it on your shirt." "Yeah," he said, smiling slightly, but without his usual warmth. "It happened." Emily set the glasses down on the table and sat down across from her, adjusting her dress. She hoped he would notice, maybe say something like, "You look gorgeous," like he used to. But he just nodded as she poured the wine and asked, "How's work? Is Reynolds still bothering you?" "Already less," she said, trying to keep the conversation going. "The project was finally approved, so I can breathe. And you?" "A typical construction site," he replied, sipping his wine. "The new contractor screwed up with the deliveries again. We had to sort it out." She nodded, feeling her hopes fading. The conversation was as dry as their morning hellos and goodbyes. She decided to try again, leaning a little closer and smiling. "You know, I was thinking maybe we could go to that Italian restaurant on the corner tomorrow. We haven't been out in a while." "You can," he said, shrugging, "if you want." His indifference cut her. Emily clutched her glass, trying to hide her irritation. She was wearing his favorite dress, cooking dinner, and he didn't even look at her properly. "Jake," she said, her voice sharpening, "do you even notice that I'm trying? I'm here trying to make this evening normal, and it's like you're somewhere else." He looked at her, his eyebrows rising slightly. "I'm here, Emily. Dinner was great, wine too. What's wrong? Are you serious?" She put the glass on the table. "You didn't even notice that I was wearing this dress. The one you always liked. I'm trying to be with you, and you just nod and say nothing." Jake sighed, putting the tablet down. "I noticed the dress. It's beautiful. But you said you didn't like it when I react. I respect your boundaries." "Respect my boundaries?" she asked, her voice shaking. "That's not respect, Jake. It's like you're getting back at me. I said one stupid thing, and now you act like I'm nothing to you." "I'm not seeking revenge," he said, his tone calm but firm. "You called my feelings disgusting. I don't want you to feel that way again. That's why I'm keeping my distance. Emily jumped up, her hands clenched into fists. This is not what I wanted. I was just nervous, and you turned it into the end of the world. Can't you just be with me like before? Like before, he looked into her eyes, and his voice was bitter. When you pushed me away for wanting you, I don't know how to do this, Emily. I can't turn off my reactions, so I just don't start. She opened her mouth to reply, but the words stuck. Instead, she turned and walked to the stove, checking on the chicken to hide her tears. Dinner passed in silence, and every bite tasted bland. Jake thanked her for the food and went off to wash the dishes, and she sat there, feeling despair tighten in her chest. The next day, Emily met Lisa at a coffee shop on Lincoln Avenue. Lisa, her friend, was a school psychologist and always willing to listen. They sat at a table by the window, sipping cappuccinos. At the next table, a guy with glasses, clearly a student, was typing on a laptop, and an older woman with a small dog was ordering tea at the counter. You look drained, Lisa said, stirring the sugar. Work or something? Jake, Emily admitted, looking into her teacup. We had a fight a couple months ago, and since then he's been different. Cold. Don't touch me. Don't joke around. Yesterday I wore his favorite dress, tried to flirt, and he just changed the subject. Wow, Lisa frowned. What did you say that made him close himself off like that? Emily hesitated, but told her story, how she had shouted that his physical attraction was disgusting, how he had stopped being himself. Lisa listened without interrupting, but her eyes widened. Damn, Emily, that's harsh, she said, setting her cup down. You literally called his feelings disgusting. No wonder he pulled away. I know I screwed up, Emily said, her voice shaking. But I was stressed. Work, Dad in the hospital. I didn't want him to quit. I just wanted some space. Now you have too much space, Lisa noted. Listen, men are like that sometimes. They hear one word and make a whole drama out of it. Talk to him. Tell him you didn't mean it that way. I tried, Emily said, fiddling with her napkin. Yesterday I almost lost it and told him he was getting back at me. And he said he was just respecting my boundaries. It's maddening. It's like he's punishing me. Maybe he's really afraid of making you angry again, Lisa said. Or maybe he's really hurt. You should see how Mark pouts when I criticize his cooking. He's been silent for a week. Try starting with an apology. Don't yell, just say you miss him. Emily nodded, but inside she was seething. Why should she apologize when he was making a mountain out of a molehill? But Lisa was right, she missed Jake, the way he looked at her like she was the only one in the room. Okay, I'll think about it, Emily said. And what about you? How's Mark? Oh, don't ask, Lisa rolled her eyes. Yesterday he decided to fix the toaster. Now we don't have a toaster and half the kitchen outlets. And I have a new student at school who thinks he's a superhero. Draws himself in a cape in every class. Emily laughed, feeling lighter for the first time that day. They chatted for another half hour until Lisa left for a parent-teacher conference. Emily finished her coffee, looking out onto the street where the boy was walking his huge Saint Bernard. She thought about Jake, about how to get him back, but her anger was still in the way. That evening, she decided to try again. Jake was home, watching the sports channel, where they were showing hockey. On the coffee table was the empty plate from the pizza he had ordered. Emily put on a tight tank top and jeans that he had once called killer and sat next to him, trying to look relaxed. Good match? She asked, pulling her legs up underneath her. Not bad, he replied, not looking up from the screen. Chicago is leading, but the defense is weak. Cool, she said, leaning in a little closer. Remember when we went to a game a couple years ago? You spilled your beer yelling at the referee. Yeah, he said, smiling slightly, but then turned back to the TV. It was fun. Emily clenched her fists, feeling the irritation return. She wanted him to look at her, to say something, to show that he cared. Jake, she said, her voice firmer, are you even going to be with me? Or are you going to pout forever over one stupid phrase? He turned around, his face calm, but his eyes showing fatigue. I'm not sulking, Emily. You said you felt disgusted when I touched you. I don't want you to feel that way again. That's why I'm staying away. That's not what I meant, she shouted, standing up. I was angry, tired, and now you're pretending that I'm some kind of bitch. You're just taking revenge on me, and it's not fair. I'm not seeking revenge, he said, his voice even. I respect what you said. You wanted space, and I'm giving it to you. It's not space, she almost screamed. It's like you've erased me. I miss you, Jake, but you're not even trying. He looked at her, and for a second, she thought he wanted to say something, but then he just shrugged. I don't know what to do with you without risking making you angry. Let's not, okay? I'm tired. Emily felt the tears stinging her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. She turned and walked into the bedroom, slamming the door. Lying there in the dark, she felt desperate. She wanted Jake back, but every step she took only deepened the abyss. And the worst part was that she couldn't stop being angry at him, at herself, at everything. Emily sat on the couch in the living room of their suburban Chicago home, flipping through the channels on the television. News, reality shows, and commercials for laundry detergent flickered across the screen, but she couldn't focus. It was 9 o'clock at night, and her husband, Jake, had left for a construction conference in Seattle 3 days earlier. Usually, when he was away on business, he'd call her every night, tell her about his coworkers, joke about boring presentations, and tell her he missed her. Things are different now. Their conversations were short, formal, like texting someone they barely knew. Jake had withdrawn since an argument 3 months earlier in which she'd called his physical attraction disgusting, and this trip had only made her more anxious. Emily felt like she was losing him, but she didn't know how to stop it. She glanced at her phone on the coffee table. Jake had promised to call after dinner, but it was late and the screen was dark. Emily picked it up, opened their chat, and saw her latest message. How are things going there? His reply, an hour ago, was terse. Fine, busy. Call later. She sighed, tossed the phone on the couch, and reached for the bowl of popcorn she'd popped for the show but hadn't popped. The doorbell rang, and Emily jumped. She stood up, straightened her old sweater, and went to answer it. Her neighbor, Mrs. Clark, an older woman with short gray hair, stood on the threshold, holding a plastic container in her hands. Emily, dear, I made some muffins, Mrs. Clark said, holding out the container. Blueberry ones. My grandson loves them, but I made too many. Oh, thank you, Emily said, accepting the gift. They smell amazing. Want to come in? No, no, I'll just be a minute, Mrs. Clark said, adjusting her glasses. My dog, Barney, stole another sock, and I have to find it before he swallows it. Where's your husband? I haven't seen his car. He's in Seattle at a conference, Emily said, trying to smile. He'll be back in a couple of days. He's a good boy, Jake, said Mrs. Clark. My husband was always grumpy when he was traveling for work, but yours is always so calm. Well, I won't disturb you. Eat your muffins. Thank you, Emily repeated, closing the door. She returned to the couch, set the container on the table, and opened it. The smell of freshly baked goods was pleasant, but she had no appetite. She picked up the muffin, took a bite, and thought about Jake. They had talked for 5 minutes yesterday. He had told her about the weather in Seattle, asked about her father, who had recently been discharged from the hospital, and said goodbye. There had been no hint of the old warmth. No, I miss you. No jokes. Emily was beginning to suspect that his distance was not just due to her words. Maybe he had met someone, or was he simply tired of her? The thought brought a lump to her throat. The phone finally rang, and she grabbed it. Jake's name appeared on the screen. Emily took a deep breath, trying to calm herself, and answered. Hi, she said, trying to sound cheerful. How's Seattle? Hey, Jake replied. His voice was flat, emotionless. Fine. Raining as usual. Just got back from dinner with some coworkers. What's up with you? Nothing special, she said, fiddling with the hem of her sweater. Mrs. Clark brought some muffins. Blueberry ones. Want me to save you a few? Cool, he said. But I'm not really into cupcakes. How's work? As always, she replied, feeling her hopes for a lively conversation fading. Reynolds is asking for another report again, but I'm used to it. How's your conference going? Anything interesting? Nothing, he said. Presentations, coffee, a bunch of people who like to talk about concrete. Today there was a talk about new cranes, but I didn't listen to half of it. That sounds exciting, she said, trying to be funny. Remember when you talked about that bridge last year? You almost fell asleep on stage. Yeah, he said, but without laughing. It happened. Listen, I'm tired. I have to get up early tomorrow. Let's talk tomorrow. Emily clutched the phone. She wanted to say something to hold him, to bring back some of their old closeness. Jake, she began, are you okay? You sound weird. I'm fine, he replied, just tired. Good night, Emily. Good night, she muttered, and he hung up. She threw the phone on the couch, tears stinging her eyes. This conversation was as empty as all their interactions had been in recent months. She missed Jake, not that polite voice, but the one who called her from trips to tell her a stupid joke or say he couldn't wait to get home. Now she was afraid he was pulling away not just because of her words, but because he'd found something or someone new. The next day, Emily went to the hospital to pick up the last of her father's paperwork. Tom was already home, but the bureaucracy required signatures. In the hall, she ran into Clara, the nurse who had been caring for her father. Clara was standing at the coffee machine, trying to get him to accept a crumpled bill. Damn car, Clara muttered, noticing Emily. Hi, how's your dad? At home, grumbling as usual, Emily smiled. Thank you for putting up with him. Oh, he was the star of the ward, Clara said, finally taking the coffee. And you look tired. Work, Emily lied, though her thoughts were on Jake. How are you? Aren't you tired of saving lives? Save? Clara laughed. I just run around with papers and injections. But yesterday there was a guy who tried to escape from the ward because he needed to feed the pigeons. It was funny. Poor pigeons, Emily said, smiling. Okay, I'm going to see the administrator. Good luck with the machine. Thank you, Clara replied, raising her glass. And hang in there. Emily grabbed her papers and headed to the office. It was noisy. Sarah was arguing with someone on the phone. Nate from it was fiddling with the printer, and Rita, the cafeteria cashier, was delivering trays of sandwiches for the meeting. Emily sat at her desk, but work was slow. She opened her browser and, almost unconsciously, went to Jake's social media, checking his page. He hadn't posted anything, but she noticed that he'd liked a post about the conference, a photo of a bunch of people in suits drinking coffee. There was a woman among them, young, with dark hair, smiling at the camera. Emily felt a twinge of jealousy. Who was she? A coworker. Something more? Emily, are you alive? Sarah's voice rang out as she peered into her office. Reynolds is asking about the report. Again. Damn, Emily muttered, closing the browser. I'm on my way. Why are you so happy? Because I just sold a contract for $500,000, Sarah grinned. Let's go celebrate after work. There's a new bartender at the bar across the street, and they say he's hot. I can't, Emily said. I have to go home. Jake's in Seattle. I'm alone. Oh, right, Sarah said, sitting on the edge of the table. How is he? Is he calling, missing me? Emily hesitated. She didn't want to spill the beans, but Sarah was her friend. Not really. He calls, but like he's just being polite. We had a fight a couple of months ago, and he's still cold. Seriously? Sarah frowned. Because of what? I said I was tired of his closeness, Emily admitted. And now he doesn't touch me at all. And in Seattle, he seems even further away. I'm starting to think there's someone there. Wait, Sarah said. You really think he's hooking up with someone? Jake? That guy who looked at you like you were a diamond? I don't know, Emily said, fiddling with her pen. He's just different. He calls, but he talks like he's a client, and I don't know how to fix that. Talk to him, Sarah said. When he comes back, Sit down and sort it out. Maybe he's just upset. Men are like that, they don't talk until they explode. Maybe, Emily said, but her voice was unsure. Okay, I'm going to Reynolds. Save me if he starts yelling. We have a deal, Sarah laughed as she left. Emily finished the day with a heavy feeling in her chest. That evening, she sat at home, eating leftover pizza and waiting for Jake to call. He called at 10, and their conversation was just as short. He told her about another presentation, asked about her day, and said goodbye. She wanted to scream for him to stop, to tell her he loved her, but she just said goodnight. Emily lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. She felt Jake slipping away, and not just because of her words. Something in Seattle had changed him, or someone he had met there. The thought scared her, but she didn't know how to get their life back. She closed her eyes, hoping tomorrow would be easier, but the fear of loss lingered. Emily sat in her office, staring at her laptop screen, her mind far from the report she had to turn in by the end of the day. Jake had returned from Seattle that morning, and she was still replaying their meeting at the airport in her mind. He was calm, even confident, but not in the way he usually did when he winked at her or joked about the bad coffee on the plane. His smile was reserved, and his hug was brief, almost formal. Their marriage had been frosty for the past 3 months, ever since she'd called his physical attraction disgusting, and the trip to Seattle had only deepened the rift. Emily sensed that something had changed, but she couldn't put her finger on it. She closed her laptop and checked her watch. 4:30 p.m. Reynolds, her boss, had asked about the report twice already, but she decided to finish it at home. She needed to talk to Jake to try to recapture some of their old closeness. Emily gathered her things and left the office, running into Nate, the it guy, in the hallway, who was carrying a box of wires. "Hey, Emily, are you leaving already?" Nate asked, adjusting his glasses. "Reynolds is going to be furious." "Let him scream," she replied, pulling on her coat. "I'll submit the report by mail. Are you moving?" "Worse," he chuckled. "The boss decided we needed to optimize the server room. Now I'm hauling cables like a loader. Good luck with Reynolds." "And you with the cables," Emily said, heading for the elevator. In the parking lot, Hero Honda started on the third try, reminding her it was time to take the car in for an inspection. The drive home took half an hour, and all the while Emily thought about Jake. Their calls in Seattle had been short, lifeless, and she was afraid he'd found something or someone there that had made him so distant. She decided to have dinner, maybe talk, as Lisa had suggested. If she showed he missed her, maybe he'd warm up. At home, Jake was in the living room, unpacking his bag from his trip. He was wearing a black t-shirt and jeans, and his keys and a folder with some papers were on the coffee table. He looked relaxed, but his face was serious, almost thoughtful. "Hi," Emily said, hanging up her coat. "How was your flight?" "It's fine," he replied, putting the shirt in the bag. "No delays, which is already a miracle. And how are you?" "Work," she said, forcing a smile. "I was thinking maybe we could cook something. I bought some steaks yesterday. We can fry them." "That sounds good," he said, but without enthusiasm. "I'll help." Emily walked into the kitchen, her hopes crushed. She wanted him to notice her efforts, to say something warm, but he was as distant as he had been for months. While she took the steaks out of the fridge, Jake brought in the potatoes and began peeling them. They worked in silence, the only sound being the sizzle of the oil in the pan. "How was the conference?" Emily asked, sprinkling salt on the meat. "Find any new concrete fans?" "It was interesting," he said, without looking up. "A lot of new ideas, a couple of useful contacts. What's new with you?" "Nothing," she said, feeling her voice tighten. "Daddy's home, grumpy as always. Work's a nightmare, but that's nothing new." He nodded, continuing to chop potatoes. Emily pressed her lips together. She wanted to scream at him to stop being so cold, but she held back. Maybe dinner would help. When the steaks were done, they sat down at the dining room table. Emily lit candles, hoping to create a cozy atmosphere, and poured them glasses of red wine. Jake thanked her, but his eyes were far away. They ate, exchanging occasional words about the weather and work, until Emily couldn't take it anymore. "Jake," she said, putting down her fork, "are you even with me? You're back, but it's like you're not here." He looked at her, his face became serious. He put down his glass and took a deep breath, as if he was preparing for something difficult. "Emily," he began, "I thought about this in Seattle. We're not right for each other. Maybe we should go our separate ways." Emily froze, her fork hanging in midair. She felt her heart squeeze. "What?" she breathed. "Where did this come from? Are you just? Are you serious?" "I'm serious," he said, looking into her eyes. "I've been thinking about this the whole trip. Our marriage, it's not working. Not like it used to." "But why?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Because of that fight? I told you I was nervous. You can't just up and leave everything." "It's not just a fight," he said, his tone calm but firm. "You said my feelings for you were disgusting. And ever since then, I've tried to be what you wanted, not touching, not showing that I wanted you. But that's not me, Emily, and I can't do this anymore." Emily felt tears sting her eyes, but she clenched her fists, trying to hold on. "I didn't mean for you to stop being yourself. I've been having a hard time. Jake, work, Dad, everything has been piling up. I didn't mean you were disgusting. But you said it," he said, his voice quieter, "and I felt wrong, like my love for you was something I had to apologize for." She opened her mouth to object, but he continued. "There was one evening in Seattle," he said, looking at the table. "After dinner, my colleagues and I went to a bar. There was a girl there, a designer, young, about 25. She started talking to me, flirting. Nothing happened. I immediately made it clear that I was married, but her attention, it reminded me of what it was like to feel desired." Emily felt her stomach clench. She pictured this girl, smiling, confident, looking at Jake in a way she hadn't seen in a long time. "So," she asked, her voice sharp, "you want to go off with some chick from the bar now?" "No," he said, looking up. "It's not about her. It's about realizing how much I've missed this feeling. You don't look at me like that, Emily. You don't show that you need me, and I can't live with the feeling that my love irritates you." "It's not fair," she said, her voice shaking. "I was under pressure. I didn't want you to feel that way. I just wanted you to give me space sometimes." "I tried," he said, "but I can't be with you without wanting you, and I don't want you to call it disgusting again. It's not fair to you or me." Emily jumped up, her chair scraping across the floor. "You just throw everything away because of one phrase. 4 years of marriage, and you're ready to leave because some designer smiled at you at a bar. It's not just one sentence," he said, his voice hardening. "It's been months of feeling like the odd one out. I've tried to be who you want, but I can't. I want to be with someone who appreciates that I want them and doesn't see it as a problem." "I appreciate it," she cried, tears rolling down her cheeks. I didn't know how to say it. I tried, Jake. I wore your favorite dress, made dinner, and you wouldn't even look at me." "I looked," he said, his gaze softening but not retreating. "But I was afraid that if I showed you how much I needed you, you would push me away again. I don't want that fear anymore." Emily fell silent, her hands shaking. She wanted to rush to him, to hug him, to tell him she would fix everything, but his words held her in place. He was calm, confident, as if he had already made his decision. She fell back into the chair, wiping away tears. "So what now?" she asked quietly. "Are you just going to leave?" "I don't know," he said, looking at his hands. "But I can't pretend everything is okay. We need to think about what we want. Maybe breaking up is best for both of us." She shook her head, her voice becoming weak. "I don't want this, Jake. I love you." "I love you too," he said, but his tone was sad. "But love shouldn't be so hard." They sat in silence until the steaks cooled. Emily stared at the candles still burning and felt her world crumble. She wanted to scream, to argue, but Jake's words about the girl, about his pain, were like a knife. She knew her words had hurt him. but she hadn't thought it would lead to this. I'll go. Go to bed, Jake said, standing up. We need to think. Good night. Good night, she muttered without looking at him. He went upstairs, and Emily sat at the table, staring at the untouched food. She felt despair, fear, and anger at herself, at him, at this designer she didn't even know. She wanted Jake back, but she didn't know how, and for the first time in 4 years of marriage, she thought it might be too late. Emily sat at the kitchen table, staring at the cold steak and the dying candles. Her hands were shaking, and Jake's words from just minutes ago rang in her ears. We're not right for each other. Maybe we should break up. She still couldn't believe he'd said that. 4 years of marriage, their home, their life, and he was ready to throw it all away because of one heated remark she'd made 3 months ago, calling his physical attraction disgusting. His revelation about the designer in Seattle who'd flirted with him only added to her shock. Emily felt panic tighten in her chest, and she knew she had to do something to stop him. Jake was still standing at the table, clearing away plates, as if their conversation was a casual discussion of the weather. His face was calm, but his eyes avoided hers. Emily clenched her fists, trying to find the words. Jake, she began, her voice shaking. You can't just end this. This is crazy. We're married. We love each other. He stopped, holding the plates, and looked at her. I know we're married, Emily, and I love you. But I can't live with the feeling that my love for you is something you're ashamed of. I'm not ashamed, she cried, standing up so abruptly that her chair creaked. I was so stressed, Jake. Work, Dad in the hospital, everything was piling up. I didn't want you to stop wanting me, I wanted some peace. You said it was disgusting, he said, his voice even but hurt. You said it was disgusting when I touched you. I tried to give you peace, but you're still angry. I don't know how to fix it. Emily felt tears sting her eyes. She stepped toward him, her hands shaking. I didn't mean you were mean. I was exhausted. You can't just throw everything away because of one stupid phrase. It's not just one sentence, he said, setting the plates on the table. It's months of feeling like I don't belong. I've tried to be who you want me to be, not touch you, not show you that I need you. But it doesn't work. I can't be with you and pretend I don't want you. Then don't pretend, she cried, her voice breaking. Be with me like you used to. I miss you, Jake. The way you looked at me, the way you held me. I didn't want you to stop. He looked at her, and for a second she thought he might soften, but then he shook his head. You called my love disgusting, Emily. I can't forget it. Every time I think about hugging you, I hear your words. I don't want to live with this. Emily fell back into her chair, wiping away her tears. She felt panic wash over her. She imagined their house empty, without Jake, without his things, without his voice. Please, she said, her voice quieter. Let's try again. I can do better. I won't say that, I promise. It's not about promises, he said, his tone sad. It's about us not being on the same page. I want to be with someone who appreciates that I want them and doesn't see it as a problem. And you want something different. I want you, she cried, her voice shaking with desperation. I just didn't know how to handle all this. You can't leave because some chick in Seattle smiled at you. It's not about her, he said, his voice hardening. She just reminded me what it was like to feel wanted. You haven't done that in months. You don't show me that you need me, Emily. You just expect me to chase you around while you decide whether or not that's convenient for you. Her words caught in her throat. She wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, but the truth cut him. She hadn't really shown him how much she valued him, hadn't told him how important he was. She had taken his attention for granted, and then pushed it away when it became inconvenient. I can change, she said quietly, looking at her hands. Give me a chance, Jake. We can make this right. He was silent, looking at the table, and this silence was worse than any answer. Finally, he said, I don't know, Emily. I'm tired of trying to be someone I'm not. We need time to figure out what we want. She shook her head, her tears falling onto the tablecloth. I don't want time. I want you. please don't do this." He didn't answer, just picked up the plates and went to the sink. Emily watched his back, feeling her world crumble. She wanted to run after him, to hug him, but his calm, his confidence scared her. He wasn't the Jake who joked and reached out to her. He was the man who had already decided that their marriage might be over. The next morning, Emily drove to the office, barely sleeping. She spent the night staring at the ceiling, replaying their conversation. Jake was asleep on the living room couch, which was another blow. She felt like she was losing him, and her excuses that she was under pressure, that she didn't want to hurt him, sounded weak even to her. The office was noisy, with phones ringing and people arguing over meeting schedules. Emily sat at her desk, but work was slow. She opened her email and saw an email from Reynolds asking her to finish the report again. She rolled her eyes, but said she'd have it done by evening. At that moment, Sarah poked her head in the door, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Hey, are you alive?" Sarah asked, setting the coffee down on the table. "You look like you haven't slept in a week." "Something like that," Emily muttered, taking the cup. "Thanks for the coffee." "What happened?" Sarah sat down across from him, her eyes narrowing. "Reynolds again? Or Dad?" "Jake," Emily admitted, her voice quiet. "He said yesterday that we weren't right for each other. Maybe we should break up." "What?" Sarah almost spilled her coffee. "Are you serious? Jake? That guy who looked at you like you were a goddess. What did you do to him?" Emily told him everything, about the fight 3 months ago, about her words, about his coldness, about the designer in Seattle. Sarah listened, her eyebrows rising higher and higher. "Damn, Emily, you're really in trouble," she said when Emily finished. "Calling his love disgusting is like spitting in his face. But giving up everything because of it, that's too much." "I know," Emily said, fiddling with the lid of her cup. "I tried to explain that I didn't mean it. I begged him to reconsider, but he seemed to have made up his mind. He said he couldn't live with the feeling that his love was irritating me." "Okay, but you're not annoyed," Sarah said. "You were just stressed. Look, men are like that. Sometimes they latch onto one word and make a tragedy out of it. Give him a couple of days, maybe he'll cool off." "What if he doesn't?" Emily asked, her voice shaking. "I don't want to lose him, Sarah. I love him." "Then fight," Sarah said, her tone becoming more serious. "Don't just cry, show him you need him. Text him, go to his work, do something, but don't sit there and wait for him to come back." Emily nodded, but inside she was seething. She wanted to fight, but the fear that Jake was already gone paralyzed her. Sarah left for the meeting, and Emily sat at the table, staring at the screen. She opened her text messages with Jake, but the last message, her goodnight from Seattle, was unanswered. She closed her phone and tried to work, but her thoughts kept returning to him. At lunchtime, she went down to the cafeteria, where Rita, the cashier, was chatting as usual with Carlos, the janitor. Carlos was complaining about the new manager, who had made him mop the floors in the conference room. "I'm serious, Rita. This guy thinks I'm his personal butler," Carlos said, wiping his hands with a rag. "And have you seen his shoes? They look like he bought them in the 90s. "Stop whining," Rita chuckled, punching in Emily's check. "Emily, no soup today? Just a sandwich?" "Yeah," Emily nodded, setting the tray down. "Not really hungry." "You look pale," Rita said, looking over her glasses. "Is it because of work? Or did your husband forget to take out the trash again?" "It's just a rough day," Emily said, taking the sandwich. "Thanks, Rita." She sat at a table in the corner, looking at her coworkers. Nate from it was arguing with someone about a new piece of software, and the woman from accounting, Marge, was leafing through a magazine. Emily took a bite of her sandwich, but it tasted bland. She thought about Jake, about what he had said, about the way he looked at her, calm but determined. Her excuses that she was under pressure, that she didn't want to hurt him, felt weak. She knew she was losing him, but she didn't know how to stop it. She came home that evening, hoping Jake would be ready to talk. He was in the garage, tinkering with the car, checking the oil, though Emily knew he'd done that last week. She stood in the doorway, watching his back. "Hi," she said, trying to sound calm. "Want to get dinner? I can order Chinese." "I'm not hungry," he replied without turning around. "But order if you want." "Jake," she said, stepping closer, "please talk to me. I don't want it to end this way. I love you." He wiped his hands on a rag and turned around, his face tired. "I love you too, Emily, but I don't know how to be with you without feeling like my love is a problem. I can't turn it off." "Then don't turn it off," she said, her voice shaking. "I was a fool, I know, but I don't want to lose you. Let's try again." He looked at her, and his silence was heavy. "I'll think about it," he said finally, "but I need time." Emily nodded, feeling the tears welling up again. She went into the house, ordered food, but couldn't eat. She sat on the couch, looking at her phone, and knew that her words weak, desperate hadn't changed his mind. She was losing him, and it was more real than ever. Emily stood at the supermarket checkout, mechanically putting groceries into her cart. Milk, bread, frozen vegetables. Her movements were automatic, and her mind was elsewhere. It had been a month since Jake had told her they weren't right for each other and suggested they break up. Since then, their communication had become even more strained. He slept in the spare room, and their conversations were limited to mundane matters like bills and schedules. Emily still clung to the hope that he would change his mind, but every day his distance became more noticeable. She felt that he was not just pulling away, but building a new life in which she didn't seem to fit. The cashier, a woman in her 50s with bright red lipstick named Doris, scanned her purchases, chatting incessantly. "Milk's gone up in price again," said Doris, scanning the bag. "My son says it's because of the taxes, but I think they're just being greedy. How are you, honey? You look tired." "It's just a long day," Emily said, forcing a smile. "Work, you know." "Oh, I know," chuckled Doris. "My husband worked at a factory for 30 years, came home and immediately sat in a chair. And what does your husband do? He's an engineer, isn't he?" "Yeah," Emily said, her voice shaking. "He's busy, lots of projects." "Good job," nodded Doris, handing her the check. "Don't let him be lazy. Men need work." Emily nodded, taking the bags and heading out to the parking lot. The cold October wind cut through her coat as she hurried to her Honda. As she loaded the groceries into the trunk, her phone vibrated. It was a text from Lisa, her friend. "Hey, you okay? I heard Jake's an amateur photographer now. What's up?" Emily froze, her fingers tightening around her phone. A photographer? Jake hadn't picked up a camera in years. She'd asked him to give it up because he wasted too much time on it when they were first married. She opened her browser and went to his social media. His page, usually empty, was now full of new posts. Black and white shots of Chicago streets, sunsets over Lake Michigan, portraits of strangers in cafes. Under one post were several comments from names she didn't recognize. "Cool shot, dude," and "You should show up." Emily felt a stab of pain. He wasn't just taking up photography again, he was doing it with an enthusiasm she hadn't seen in their marriage in a long time. At home, she began unpacking her groceries when she heard the front door open. Jake walked in, holding a backpack and a folder of blueprints. He was wearing a dark jacket and jeans, and his hair was slightly disheveled, as if he had just returned from a walk. "Hello," he said, putting his backpack by the door. "Have you eaten yet?" "No," she replied, taking milk out of the bag. "I just got back from the store. Do you want me to order pizza?" "No need, I've eaten," he said, heading for the stairs. "I was at a cafe with the guys after work." "With the guys?" she asked again, her voice sharper than she intended. "What guys?" He stopped and turned around. "Just friends. Colleagues, a couple of new acquaintances. Nothing special." Emily pressed her lips together. She wanted to ask about the photo, about his new posts, but instead she said, "I saw your photos on social media. You're filming again." "Yeah," he said, shrugging. "I decided to get back to it. Helps take my mind off things." "Distraction from what?" she asked, feeling her irritation growing. From me. He looked at her, his face was calm, but his eyes showed fatigue. From everything, Emily, work, stress, it's just a hobby. She wanted to shout that this wasn't just a hobby, that he was building a new life without her, but she held back. Instead, she nodded and went back to the groceries. Jake went upstairs, the sound of his footsteps on the stairs, the only thing that broke the silence. The next day, Emily met Sarah at a diner across the street from the office. The diner smelled of fried bacon and coffee, and the cook behind the counter was a balding guy named Tony, who was loudly arguing with a waitress about an order. Emily and Sarah sat at a table by the window, plates of burgers and fries in front of them. "Are you serious?" Sarah said, taking a bite of her burger. "He's a photographer now? Jake, who never even took a selfie. What's with that?" "I don't know," Emily said, picking at her potato. "He posts pictures like it's his new crush. And some new friends. I don't even know who they are." "Maybe he's just worried," Sarah said, wiping her hands with a napkin. "Guys are like that sometimes. They find a hobby to keep from going crazy. My brother, when he broke up with his girlfriend, started collecting beer cans. He looked like a psycho." "It's not just a hobby," Emily said, her voice quiet. He's different. Confident, calm, like he's better off without me." "Hey, don't get worked up," Sarah said, frowning. "He's still your husband. Talk to him. Ask him about his friends, his photos. Maybe he's just trying to fill a void." "What emptiness?" Emily snapped. "He's the one who decided we weren't right for him. I tried to fix it, and he just kept moving away." Sarah sighed, taking a sip of her cola. "Okay, but yelling at him won't help. Try being softer. Ask about his photos, praise him. Maybe he'll feel like you're still with him." Emily nodded, but inside she was seething. She didn't want to praise him for what he was doing without her. She wanted him to come back to her, not build a new life. They chatted for another half hour until Sarah left to meet a client. Emily stayed to finish her coffee, looking out onto the street where a guy in a bright jacket was handing out flyers for a new gym. That evening, she decided to follow Sarah's advice and talk to Jake. He was home, sitting in the living room with his laptop, looking through some photos. The screen showed pictures of a park taken in the morning light and a portrait of an older man with a newspaper. Emily sat on the couch, trying to look casual. "Hi," she said. "Cool photos. Where did you take them?" "In the park by the lake," he answered, without looking up from the screen. "The light is good in the morning." "Cool," she said, pulling her legs up under her. "You're a real pro. Are you thinking of showing off?" "Maybe," he said, shrugging. "I'm just filming for myself for now. It helps me think." "Think about what?" she asked, her voice growing tense. He looked at her, his face neutral. "About everything. Work, life, you know." Emily clenched her fists. She wanted to ask about his new friends, but instead she said, "I heard you go to therapy. Is that true?" He nodded, closing the laptop. "Yes, I started a couple of weeks ago. I want to understand myself." "Figure out what?" she asked, feeling her voice shake. "How to leave me." "Emily," he said, his tone weary, "this isn't about you. This is about me. I'm trying to figure out what I want." She wanted to scream that he should want her, but she held back. Instead, she stood up and went into the kitchen to keep from crying. She knew he was changing, and that scared her more than his coldness. A couple of days later, Emily received news that changed everything. Lisa called her at lunch, her voice excited. "Emily, are you sitting down?" Lisa asked. "I just heard from a friend who works at a gallery. Jake is dating an artist. Her name is Claire. She's 28. She teaches at an art school." Emily felt her heart stop. "What?" she breathed. "Are you sure?" "My friend saw them in a cafe," Lisa said. "They were sitting together, chatting, laughing. She says that Claire just couldn't take her eyes off him. Sorry, I didn't mean to upset you." Emily mumbled something and hung up. Her hands were shaking as she opened Jake's social media. There was nothing about Claire, but she found the art school page, and saw a post from an exhibition of a girl with dark hair and a bright smile. The caption read, "Claire Thompson, our new teacher." Emily felt sick. That evening, she couldn't resist and drove to the cafe Lisa had mentioned, a small place on Madison Avenue with big windows. She parked across the street and sat in her car, looking out the door. Half an hour later, she saw them, Jake and a girl who must have been Claire. She was in a denim jacket, her hair pulled back into a messy bun. They walked out of the cafe, and Claire was talking, laughing. Jake was smiling, that same smile, wide and genuine, that Emily hadn't seen in months. Claire touched his arm, and he didn't pull away, but leaned closer, listening to her. Emily gripped the steering wheel, tears falling into her lap. She recognized that smile the way Jake had looked at her when they first started dating, when he couldn't take his eyes off her. Now he looked at someone else. She started the car and drove away, feeling her hopes crumble. Jake wasn't just drifting away, he'd found someone who seemed to appreciate him in a way she couldn't. Emily sat on the living room couch of their suburban Chicago home, clutching a mug of cold tea. The room felt too big, too empty without half the furniture Jake had taken when he left 6 months ago. The closet in the bedroom, his favorite chair, even the coffee table they'd bought at a garage sale were all gone, leaving behind bare walls and silence. A year had passed since their fight, when she'd called his physical attraction disgusting, and now she was alone, scrolling through social media, where Jake's new girlfriend posted photos with captions that made her heart clench. Emily opened her phone, even though she knew it was a bad idea. Claire, a 28-year-old artist, had a feed full of colorful snapshots of her and Jake at an exhibition, in a park, having dinner at a cozy restaurant. The latest post was from yesterday. Jake, smiling, holding a camera, and the caption, "The most amazing man who makes every day better." Emily felt tears sting her eyes. She locked the screen and tossed the phone onto the couch, but the image of Jake happy, confident wouldn't go away. She stood up, walked into the kitchen, and set her mug in the sink. The fridge was almost empty. Some yogurt, a couple of apples, and the remains of a pizza she'd ordered 3 days ago. Emily hadn't cooked since Jake left. Their kitchen, where they'd once chatted and laughed and argued over how to chop onions, was now just a place where she ate on the go. She looked at the empty table and remembered how she'd tried to save their marriage, cooking his favorite dishes, wearing the dress he adored, but he'd only smiled politely, remaining distant. The doorbell rang, and Emily jumped. She straightened her old sweater and went to answer it. Mrs. Clark, their neighbor, stood there, holding a plastic container. Her gray hair was pulled back into a neat bun, and her eyes, as always, sparkled with curiosity. "Emily, I brought pie," Mrs. Clark said, holding out the container. "Apple and cinnamon." Barney stole a piece of dough again, but I shooed him away. "Thank you," Emily said, accepting the pie. "Want to come in? I can make tea." "Oh dear, I'd love to, but my grandson is arriving in an hour," Mrs. Clark replied. "Where's your Jake? I haven't seen him for a long time." "On a trip again?" Emily squeezed the container, her smile tight. "No, we broke up. He moved." "Oh dear," Mrs. Clark gasped, her hand touching her chest. "I'm so sorry. Such a nice guy. What happened, if it's not a secret?" "It just didn't work out," Emily said, looking away. "It happens." "It happens," Mrs. Clark sighed. "But hang in there. You're young and beautiful. You'll find your man yet. And eat your pie, it lifts your spirits." "Thank you," Emily repeated, closing the door. She set the pie down on the table and returned to the couch. Her phone lit up again, a notification from Sarah, her coworker, who'd sent a photo of herself at the bar, holding a cocktail, and captioned it, "Where are you?" "It's Friday," Emily had written. "Home, tired. Have fun." She hadn't been to a bar in months. She and Jake used to go there on weekends, drinking beer, laughing at bad covers of local bands. Now the idea of fun seemed foreign. Emily picked up her phone and pulled up Claire's page again. She knew it hurt, but she couldn't stop. Another photo, Jake and Claire in front of the lake, his arm around her shoulders, her laughing. Emily remembered him holding her like that, looking at her with that same smile. She blamed herself for not appreciating it, for letting her harsh words, disgusting, ruin everything. But part of her was still angry at Jake. Why hadn't he fought for them? Why hadn't he compromised instead of just leaving? At the office the next day, Emily tried to focus on the new project, but her mind was busy. Reynolds, her boss, was walking down the hall giving orders, and Sarah popped into her office with more gossip. "Hey, did you hear that?" Sarah said, plopping down in her chair. "Nate from it spilled coffee on the server yesterday. Now the whole team is in a panic." "Poor Nate," Emily replied, not looking up from the screen. "Is he even alive?" "For now, yes," Sarah chuckled. "Why are you so gloomy? Is Reynolds bothering you again?" "No," Emily said with a sigh. "I just saw pictures of Jake with his new girlfriend. They look happy." Sarah frowned, her voice softening. "Oh, Emily, why are you watching this? Block them and move on. He left, it's his choice." "I know," Emily said, fiddling with her pen, "but I can't stop thinking it's my fault. I pushed him away, Sarah. I told him his love was disgusting, and now he's with someone who doesn't." "Hey, you were stressed," Sarah said, leaning closer. "Work, your dad, everything. You're not a monster, you're just a human being. And he could have fought for you instead of running to the first artist he saw." "Maybe," Emily said, but her voice was unsure. "But I should have appreciated him. He loved me like no one else ever did, and I screwed it up." "Stop blaming yourself," Sarah said, her tone firmer. "You can't change the past. Let's go to a bar tonight, dance, forget about him for the evening." "I can't," Emily said. "I need to, just be home." Sarah sighed but nodded. "Okay, but if you change your mind, call me. And delete him from social media, seriously." Emily nodded, but she knew she couldn't. Sarah left, and she remained at the table, staring at the screen. She knew that her failure to appreciate Jake's love, her harsh words, had destroyed their marriage. She saw now that love couldn't be criticized and controlled and expected to stay the same. But part of her still clung to the idea that Jake could have fought for them and found a way to stay. This internal conflict tore her apart, leaving her alone with a lesson that came too late. That evening, she drove to the diner on Madison Avenue, where she had once seen Jake with Claire. She wasn't sure why. Maybe she wanted to feel his presence, maybe she wanted to punish herself. The diner was noisy. Students chatted at tables. The waitress, a young woman with a pierced nose, was serving burgers. Emily sat by the window, ordered a coffee, and looked out onto the street, where a guy in a hoodie was walking his Labrador. "Hey, are you alone?" a voice called. It was Tony, the cook, standing behind the counter, wiping his hands on a towel. "Where's your boyfriend? The one who always orders a double cheeseburger?" Emily smiled weakly. "We broke up. Now I'm alone." "Oh, sorry," Tony said, his face softening. "Well, the coffee's on the house. Don't be sad, okay?" "Thank you," she said, looking into her cup. She sipped her coffee, feeling the loneliness wash over her. She thought of Jake, the way he laughed, the way he looked at her, the way he brightened her life. She had lost that because of her words, her failure to show him that she needed him. But even now, sitting in this diner, she was angry at him for leaving, for not giving her a second chance. This conflict, the guilt and the hurt, was her only companion. At home, she lay down on the couch, turned on the TV, but didn't watch. She thought about how her life had changed in a year. She was alone in an empty house with a bitter lesson. Love requires care, not criticism, but part of her still whispered that Jake could have stayed, and that made her loneliness even harder. She closed her eyes, hoping that tomorrow would be easier, but she knew the pain would never go away. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.